Before I open the watch, I just want to mention that it's almost impossible to work on a watch without having appropriate eye aid. And at my age, I need reading glasses, and on top of the reading glasses, I have a loupe about 3 power. This gives me the magnification that I need to see what's going on in the watch. You cannot work on a watch properly without magnification. Don't even try. First thing we do to get the movement out of the case is, of course, we have to open the case back using a case blade. Not a knife, but a professional blade helps us open the back. You look for a little notch in the back, and the back opens. This watch has a dust cover inside, which also has to be removed by putting the blade under the notch, releasing it, and putting that cover aside. That's not hinged. And the next step is to take the appropriate size screwdriver and remove the stem. The watch cannot come out of the case without removing the stem, the winding stem. This watch, the stem is held in with a screw. Some watches it's held in with a little push button, but on this one there's a screw right next to the stem called the detent screw. And this one you loosen about 2 turns, and the stem should pull out. If it doesn't pull out easily, you may have to release it a little bit more. There it comes. And I have a plastic container, a petition plastic box, into which I put the stem. All the watch parts, as they're removed, are put into a plastic container so that there's no danger of spilling them, losing them, and you know where they all are. Now you take the next appropriate size screwdriver and remove the 2 screws which hold the watch in the case. These are known as casing screws. 1 and 2. And with your tweezers, never handle watch parts with your fingertips. Remove the 2 screws. Most watch movements come out of the case from the front, so you have to remove the crystal to get the watch out of the case. Even though we've already removed the retaining screws, the case screws, it will not come out because the crystal and the bezel are blocking the way for the watch to come out of the case. Now, the bezel on this hunting case watch is pressed on, and there's another notch using that same case blade. Carefully lift the bezel off the watch and put that aside. Now the watch is ready to be removed from the case. Taking the watch, just gently push it out of the case, and you have the movement out of the case, and the case you can put aside. We're now ready to begin taking this movement apart. First thing we have to do, whenever you work on a mechanical watch, one with a mainspring, you must release the mainspring's pent-up power. If you try to take the watch apart without releasing the mainspring, you're courting disaster. It cannot be done. And to release the mainspring, the best way is to use the winding stem. We have had removed the winding stem from the watch already. I'm reinserting it, and I am going to take a piece of what we call pegwood. This is a round, very straight grain piece of wood with a sharpened tip. I sharpened it with a knife, and I wind the watch slightly, pull the ratchet pawl back. We call it in watchmaking a click, and then very gently let the power off the mainspring by letting the crown turn gently between your fingertips. When it's fully unwound, the watch has no more power on the wheels, and you are ready to start taking it apart. Do not ever take a watch apart without releasing the power of the mainspring. Most important. Also notice that I have a fixture under the watch called a movement rest. Never try to work on a watch movement on a tabletop. You must have it properly supported so that the movement is held and it doesn't get damaged while you're working. The next step is to remove the minute and hour hand using an appropriate device such as this. This is a Presto hand remover. It puts pressure on the hands upwards, pulls them off, and at the same time has 2 small fiber feet which put pressure on the dial. The only thing is it may scratch a dial. You may run into a watch face, or some people call them faces, they're dials, that will get scratched by using a hand remover. So the best protection you can use is something like a piece of saran wrap. Cover the watch dial with it, and then take the watch movement, hold it in your fingers, and take the hand remover and carefully let the jaws of the hand remover go underneath the hands and pull. The saran wrap does 2 things. First of all, it protects the dial from being scratched. Secondly, it prevents the hands from flying away due to the pressure of the hand remover. Both hands are now off. I'm going to take those two hands, the hour and minute hand, put them in the plastic container, put them aside, handle them carefully. Sometimes hands are painted and you can damage them. Now, I'm not going to remove the second hand from this watch. The second hand is going to stay on the watch temporarily, because if you try to pull the second hand, the shaft that carries the hand, it's called the fourth pivot, is very delicate, and you could break it trying to lift the hand off. There's a safer way to do it. The safer way is to lift the dial off and take the second hand off with it. So we're now going to go around the side of the watch and loosen the two dial screws. Some watches have 3 dial screws, a few have 4, but most have only 2. And the dial screws are usually radial, meaning they're coming in from the edge of the watch. Loosen the screw, don't take it out, probably 2 turns is sufficient. Turn the watch over, loosen the other screw a couple of turns. Now very carefully go underneath the dial, lift it very gently. The dial will lift off, and at the same time the second hand should come off with the dial. And there it is, the second hand just came off. I'm going to pick it up with a tweezer, put it in the plastic container, continue lifting the dial. Don't force anything in watch repair. If you ever have to force something, you're probably making an error. Because if you force something on a watch, you're going to break it. Carefully lift the dial, and then hold it with your fingertips on the edge, and put that away, because you won't need it for a little while. You have the dial off, you're taking a look at the front of the watch. This is the dial side of the watch, and you will see there are some setting parts there and what we call motion work. Hour wheel, which carries the hour hand, cannon pinion, which carries the minute hand, and a minute wheel, which reduces the speed of the dial train from 1 rotation per hour to 1 rotation in 12 hours. Because the hour hand goes 12 times slower than the minute hand, you need this reduction gearing. So the first step after we've taken the dial off is not to remove anything else, it's to tighten those 2 dial screws. After you've had a little bit of experience repairing watches, you'll find that dial screws are the most commonly missing screws in the watch. Just to tighten them up as soon as you take the dial off, and now they will not come loose. They're in, and you won't have to touch them again until you put the dial on. The next step is to remove the hour wheel. This is the one that turns 1 time in 12 hours, and there's an hour wheel, and that is put aside. That carries the hour hand. Now the next wheel we're going to remove is called a cannon pinion. It's a tubular wheel with a pinion on the bottom, a small gear on the bottom, which travels once an hour, and that carries the minute hand. Now that is pressed onto a shaft, and it's held on with friction. And the idea is the friction is just enough so that the hands have a little friction when you set them, and yet when you set the hands, you don't tear on all the gearing of the watch. It's not a rigid connection to the rest of the watch. It's a friction clutch in there. So there's a couple of ways to remove it. One way is to use a device called a pin vise. You take a pin vise, unscrew the chuck at the end, loosen it up, and it has a round hole in the end, and you carefully grasp the cannon pinion and then just twist. And if all goes well, the cannon pinion should come right off. Do not try to pull the cannon pinion off with pliers or tweezers. You will be courting disaster. You must grasp the cannon pinion tightly and pull it straight off. Don't pull it at an angle, because you do not want to break the wheel that it's on. And there it is. It's off. It's in the pin vise. And the next step is to take off what we call the set bridge. This is the part over here that holds down the minute wheel, and it also holds down most of the setting parts. This is held on in this watch with 1 screw. There are a few spring-loaded parts underneath it, so you have to be a little careful taking that off. Lift off the set bridge and put it aside. Then you remove the minute wheel, which is the one that reduces the speed of the center shaft from 1 rotation per hour to 1 rotation in 12 hours. Put that aside. Now you've got the few more setting parts. You have what we call a clutch lever and a clutch lever spring. Be very careful. The spring is under a little tension. Out comes the spring, goes in there. Now the clutch lever is out, and you have almost all of the setting parts out of the watch. Now it's time to turn the watch over and take the train apart. turn the watch over so that we're now working on the back side of the watch, called the top plate, and we have no power on the mainspring. We've already released the power, so we're ready to remove the mainspring bridge, or the barrel bridge that contains the winding parts. First thing to do is to loosen the screw that holds down the ratchet wheel. Almost always, that screw is a right-handed screw, meaning it unscrews to the left. Usually a fairly large screw. Loosen the screw, remove it, put it into your parts container. Now you remove the ratchet wheel. That's the wheel that does the winding and operates the pawl to hold the mainspring power back. The next screw you have to remove is the crown wheel screw. This is the tricky one. The crown wheel screw is almost always a left-handed thread, meaning it unscrews to the right. If you try to take it off in the conventional fashion, you'll have a two-part screw. One part still in the watch, very difficult to get out, one part in your tweezers. So always remember, this crown wheel screw is almost always a left-handed thread. Sometimes they're marked with a code, sometimes they're not. So you remove the crown wheel, which transmits power from the stem to the ratchet wheel, and there is a little tiny steel ring inside most of them called a crown wheel core. Take that off, put it aside. Now you're ready to remove the barrel bridge. Any part in a watch which holds down wheels or gears and has two sides to it is called a bridge, because it bridges over the wheel. This particular bridge is held down with 3 screws. And we loosen those screws. 1, 2, 3. Again, with your tweezers, remove the 3 screws, put them into the parts container. Now you're ready to lift off the bridge. Look around the edge of the bridge, and oftentimes there are little notches underneath the bridge, and you can put your screwdriver under there very carefully and lift the bridge off. And here it comes. There's the barrel bridge. Put that in your parts container, and you can now remove the mainspring barrel. And we're just going to put that aside for now. Now we're ready to remove the train wheel bridge. This is the next bridge that carries train wheels. This is held down with 2 screws. Loosen them both. Put the screws aside. Again, put a screwdriver underneath the bridge, looking for the little notch. Lift the bridge gently. Again, never force anything. If it doesn't come out, you're doing something wrong. Put the bridge aside. Now you have the watch pillar plate. We call that bottom plate the pillar plate, with all of the wheels still inside of it except the mainspring barrel. And there are usually 4 wheels in a watch: center wheel, third wheel, fourth wheel, and escape wheel. The escape wheel looks different than all the others. The center wheel is the largest. It's right next to the mainspring barrel. The third wheel is the next largest. The fourth wheel usually has a long pivot to carry the second hand. The fourth wheel is the one that turns once a minute, and that carries the second hand, has a very special long pivot on the bottom, easily broken. And of course the escape wheel is the smallest, but it has a different shape than all the others. Now we're ready to lift those wheels out. Take your tweezer, very carefully lift them out. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Next step is to remove the stem for cleaning, and the 2 parts that are underneath the stem are the clutch and the winding pinion. I'm going to loosen the detent screw again. In fact, I'm going to loosen it completely. Remove the detent screw. Put that in the parts container. Carefully remove the stem and the winding pinion and the clutch. Last thing we have to take out is the escapement parts. And this is the heart of the watch. This is the balance wheel. And this particular balance wheel is a shock-resistant balance wheel. On older watches, if you dropped the watch, you oftentimes broke the balance staff. That's the arbor of the balance wheel. On a shock-resistant watch, the jewels are held in springs, which if you drop the watch, the springs have a little give to them and prevent the balance staff from breaking in most cases. So in this watch, we're going to remove the balance jewels, the upper and lower, and there are 4 of them, 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom. And we're going to remove them from the spring-loaded setting and put them aside for cleaning. Now, if you just put the balance jewels into a cleaning basket in a large cleaning machine, you're liable to lose them. So the safe way is to put it in a small basket like this, which will hold the jewels so you don't lose them. Now, this is an Inca block watch. That's a trademarked type of shock-resistant setting, and I understand there's several, maybe dozen types of jewel settings, shock-resistant jewel settings. Inca block is one of the more popular ones, and it's held in with a spring that looks like a lyre, and on the end you pull the spring back gently, one side at a time, and then once you have released both sides, you hinge it backwards. You don't try and pull the spring out because you'll break it, and out comes the cap jewel and the hole jewel. The hole jewel is the jewel that the balance staff goes through, and the cap jewel is the one that caps the end of it, holds the oil in, and prevents the balance staff from going any further up and down. It limits the end play on it. Now that we've got the upper balance jewels out, I'm going to turn the watch plate over to the pillar plate side and do the same thing for the lower jewels. Now you have to be careful. You have to watch these jewels. Sometimes they're different and sometimes they're the same between the top and the bottom. And if there is a difference, the cap jewel on the balance top, or the cock we call it, has a little thicker cap jewel. This one has a little thicker cap jewel, I noticed when I took it out. So just be aware of that if they are different, thick one goes in the cock and the thin cap jewel goes in the plate, or the older term for it is the foot. Watchmaking being very traditional, we still use some of the very old terminology for these parts. Some people call them upper and lower balance jewels, some people call them cock and foot jewels. The term, you just have to understand that we're talking about the same thing. They're not 4 different items, but just 2 different items. Now we're ready to remove the balance wheel, and this balance wheel and the balance cock. Now it's called a cock because it's not a bridge. The bridge has, remember, a screw at each end holding it down. A cock is sort of like half a bridge. It has a screw holding down one end. I'm going to hold my hand out like that to describe what a cock does, and this is what a bridge is like. The bridge actually bridges the wheels, and the cock just holds it from one end. Now I'm going to loosen and remove the one balance cock screw. Yep. I'll use a little heavier screwdriver. And again, remove the screw, and then get underneath the cock, a little notch under there with your screwdriver, lift it gently, and just put it aside. And finally, one more part has to be removed. It's called the pallet. The pallet is oftentimes called the pallet fork and arbor. The anchor, it has several different names depending on who's calling it and which book you're reading. But what it does is it translates the rotary motion of the gear train into the oscillating motion of the balance wheel. And that is held down with a pallet cock. Again, it's only held down with one screw in this watch. And this is one of the most delicate parts of the watch, so you have to be exceptionally careful removing the pallet. Remove the pallet cock screw, put it into a small cleaning basket, and again, get underneath the pallet cock with a fine screwdriver, lift it carefully, very carefully, out it comes, and finally, there's the pallet. Now, while we're cleaning this watch, I like to put the balance wheel back into the watch with the balance cock, with its one screw. It's not connected to anything else. There are no other parts in the watch. The jewels have been removed, and the balance cock will safely hold the balance wheel under it while you're cleaning it in the cleaning machine. So we'll put that back in, the one screw back in, tighten it down, and we are about ready to take all of the parts now and put them in a cleaning basket and go over to the cleaning machine and clean this watch. We're ready to clean this watch, and to clean the watch we have to put it into a machine that spins the watch movement, removes all the grease and oil, and then dries the watch off after it get off all the cleaning fluid, and then we can reassemble it. This is a basket from an L&R machine. It has a large capacity bottom, a small partition container on the top, and then a lid. And I like to put the larger parts into the bottom of the cleaning basket. The plate and the balance wheel, the bridges, all the parts that can't be damaged by moving them around go into the cleaning basket. The center wheel seems to be a safe bet. Crown wheel. Now the smaller parts I am not going to put down there. I'm going to put them into a small container with the balance jewels and the pallet, because we don't want them to get caught in any other part and break, especially the fourth wheel with its exceptionally long pivot. This watch, the third wheel is small, can go in there. The escape wheel is very delicate, so that's good to go into that small basket. And all the screws, the cannon pinion, all can go into that small basket. All of the wheels, the small wheels, we can close that basket up. That goes into the bottom of the cleaning basket. Everything is now protected by that small basket. One more part that we have to take apart is the mainspring barrel. We want to get the mainspring out of the barrel, and there's several ways to do this. And probably the best way, if the barrel has a notch on the cover, you can take a small screwdriver and go into the notch and gently lift the barrel cover off. Very carefully lift it off. The barrel arbor, the central shaft of the barrel, stays in the barrel temporarily, and to remove that, take the pin vise. This tool you use for the cannon pinion may fit, or you may have to use a slightly smaller or larger one, but grasp the arbor with a pin vise and then turn it out in the opposite direction that the mainspring winds. That way it won't fly from the mainspring's power. If you make a little mistake, you still have the arbor. There it is, right in the pin vise. Put it into the cleaning basket, and next, very carefully remove the mainspring from the barrel by grasping the inner coil and letting it come out, a coil at a time. Be very careful, because a mainspring can be very powerful, and if you slip with it, the barrel can be thrown across the floor. There's the barrel. This contains all the mainspring. That goes in the cleaning machine, and the mainspring itself is not cleaned in the conventional watch cleaning machine. This is the mainspring right here, and you inspect it. You can run your fingers down it, feel if there are any lumps, any distortions. If you feel any lumps or distortions, throw it away. If the end piece over here where it hooks onto the barrel is damaged, throw it away. If there's any rust on the mainspring, throw it away. If the mainspring is blue in color, throw it away. The blue color indicates that it's probably 40 or 50 years old. And today we no longer use those blue mainsprings. We use nothing but unbreakable white alloy mainsprings. And there's the shape of a pretty good mainspring. It has what we call a reverse curve. If the mainspring isn't that large, throw it away. If the mainspring is very small, doesn't open up very much, throw it away. In fact, if you're in doubt at all about the mainspring, throw it away. They're not very expensive. Get the correct mainspring and replace it. This one feels good, and we can use this one again. We are in the cleaning room. We're ready to clean the watch. I've got the basket in my hand, and I'm going to put it on the machine called an L&R ultrasonic. This is one type of cleaning machine that can be used. There are older machines that were made by L&R and other companies that are still around, and they do an excellent job. What you use in these cleaning machines is what we call watch cleaning fluid, and this particular machine has 2 cleaners, and then over here it has 2 rinses. So you go through a first clean, a second clean, a rinse, and then a final rinse, and then a heated drying. Now this is fully automatic. Once we start the machine, it works by itself. But if you have an older machine, you have to do it manually. Go from wash to rinse to dry. But it does just as nice a job. You don't need the fully automatic to do the job. It's just if you're doing more work, the automatic one will save you some time. So we're going to take the cleaning basket, put it up in here, and we will press the button and start the machine. It's automatically going to go into the first cleaning fluid. Well, the cleaning machine has gone through all of its cycles, and it's ready to be taken off the machine. Be careful whenever you remove the basket from the machine. It could be quite warm, This is quite warm, but I'm holding it from the upper edge and it's not too bad. And when it's very warm, I know that the watch inside is dry. Now we're ready to go back to the bench and put this watch back together. We're back at the workbench, and we've got the watch parts in the cleaning basket, all clean. And take them out carefully. Put them out on your bench in front of you. Take the movement rest, and we'll take the pillar plate again. And first thing I'm going to do is remove the balance cock and the balance wheel. And just put it aside for now. And it's time to begin examining what we're going to put back together. First thing we have to do is clean out the jewels with a piece of pegwood. Pegwood is a straight-grained, small piece of wood. It's round, looks like a small dowel, but it's not dowel wood. Some people use toothpicks, but we sharpen the end with a little bit of a razor knife so that we put sort of a pencil point on it. And the idea of the pegwood is you can put it in the jewel, right through the hole of the jewel, twist it around, and it removes any caked oil and gum. No matter how good your cleaning machine is, and no matter how good your cleaning solution is, very often you'll have some caked old oil. The old oils they used to use on watches turned into a very hard, fatty substance which is very difficult to remove with cleaning fluid. So mechanical cleaning with a piece of pegwood is always the final step. Pegwood does a nice job, and as you dirty the pegwood, you keep sharpening it, removing the dirty wood. Keep sharpening as if you had a pencil there. You make the point small enough to go through the jewel, and you also take the train bridge and do the same thing to the 3 jewels in this train bridge. Peg them, make sure the jewels are clean, and finally on the barrel bridge in this watch there is 1 jewel. Go right through it with the pegwood, make sure the jewel is clean. Now you're ready to try putting the train back together. We have a small basket, a small cleaning basket with all the small wheels and screws in it. I'm going to spread that out into a container so that the parts don't roll all over the bench. Unscrew the cover. Put the basket back together, put it aside. Don't dispose of it yet because there may be a part trapped in there you're unaware of. This is the time to really carefully inspect everything you're putting back together. I'm going to pick up the escape wheel. Look at each wheel with your loop. Look for bent, rusty pivots, any rust on the pinions, the small gear part of the wheel, any bent teeth. Tip the wheel back and forth. Make sure that there is nothing damaged on each wheel. Look at all 4 wheels. And after you have done all 4 wheels, you're ready to start installing the train. The pillar plate is mounted on the movement stand. Start in this case with the escape wheel. That's the one that looks different than all the others, made out of steel. Then the 4th wheel, the one with the long pivot that carries the second hand. The long pivot goes through the pillar plate so that it'll carry the second hand when it rotates once a minute. Then the 3rd wheel, put that right in. Each wheel meshing with the next. The large wheel pushing on the small steel pinion. Always large wheel pushing on a pinion. Each wheel on the train goes faster than the one in front of it. Now you're ready to take the train bridge and carefully line it up and place it in place with the steady pins. It has 2 little pins underneath it which fit into holes in the pillar plate. Again, handle all parts with tweezers. No fingers, please. Now I like to use a piece of clean pegwood to hold the train bridge down. Instead of pushing on it with a finger, I use the pegwood. It lets me put downward pressure while I feel the wheels into each jewel. I've got 2 wheels into the jewels and we've got 1 more to go. And there they are. The wheels are spinning freely. Now we're ready to button that down with a screw. We're going to take a train bridge screw. And And this watch, all the bridge screws are the same, so we don't have to worry too much about that. The more modern the watch, usually the less variation in screw types. Some of the older watches that you work on, you have to watch out because some of the screws are various lengths. But on most of the modern watches, almost all the bridge screws are the same length. Now we're ready to put the mainspring back in the barrel. But as you can see, the barrel is fairly small and the mainspring's quite large. If you just try to stuff it in there with your fingertips, you'll have a broken mainspring and a watch that won't run. So you have to use a mainspring winding set. We're going to use one today that was made by Bergeon in Switzerland. And we are going to lubricate the mainspring and then put it into the barrel. Now to lubricate it, in this case we're using a Moebius mainspring lube. It came in this bottle, and I have moistened a piece of tissue paper with the mainspring lube, and you very carefully take the mainspring and draw it through the lubricant without distorting the coils. Go right through the tissue. You want a smooth coat of oil on both sides of the mainspring. Then you take the mainspring winding device, and it has an arbor with a hook that grabs the mainspring. You catch the mainspring with it and crank it up into its own little barrel. Very carefully wind it, and it's winding in there. What this does is it allows you to put the mainspring back in without causing any distortion. Then when you come to the end of the mainspring, because the mainspring has a hook on the end, you carefully tuck the hook into the barrel of the winding tool, and then let the winding arbor back out, turn it backwards, out it comes. Very carefully take it out, and you have a mainspring fully wound in this winding tool. Now you pick up the barrel, again holding it with your fingertips only on the edge, push the mainspring barrel up to the tool, and then push the plunger on the back of the tool, and the mainspring should go right into the barrel, and there it is. It's all lubricated, ready to be closed up. We're ready to put the arbor back into the barrel before we close the barrel, and we're going to do it just the exact opposite of the way we remove the arbor. We're going to take the pin vise, grasp the arbor in a pin vise. That'll give you some security so you will not do any damage, you won't lose anything. And we're going to take a little bit of KT22 grease. This is a low-cost grease, and it is good for stem and setting parts. You want to grease the barrel arbor where it goes through the barrel. Just a light coating of grease on there. It must be lubricated, not overly lubricated, but a little lubrication applied with a small, fine oiler. I'm using a black oiler. This is the finest one they sell. It has a little bit of a spade tip on the end, and it holds oil or it holds grease properly and allows you to lubricate something. Now you push the arbor back in through the mainspring opening, let it catch, and now you can release the pin vise. And the arbor stays in the mainspring barrel. Now you've got the arbor in there. Take a little more of the KT22 grease, lubricate the top of the arbor where it goes through the barrel cover. Take the barrel cover, and on these modern watches there is no indexing required for the cover. You just put it on wherever you want. There's no mark to line up, and I like to use my tweezers as a bit of a vise. I just put the barrel and the cover in between the tweezer and give it a squeeze, go around, turn the barrel until the cover is in tightly. Now the thing you have to check is called end shake. Make sure that barrel arbor has some end shake, not too much, but it has to be able to move up and down in the barrel. Otherwise, if it binds, it will stop the watch. This barrel is now ready to go into the plate and be covered by the train bridge. A little bit of a drop of grease on the lower part of the barrel arbor where it goes through the pillar plate, and then we turn it over and put a little drop of grease on the upper part of the barrel arbor where it goes through the barrel bridge. Don't need a lot, and if you put oil on there, the oil's liable to flow all over the watch, but the grease should stay in one place. Now we have to put one more screw back into the watch before we can put the bridge on. That is the detent screw. It's an odd-looking screw, different than any other screw in the watch, and it goes through a hole right near where the stem is. And it's recommended that you put a little tiny bit of grease right where the detent screw goes through the plate. That allows it to work smoothly in there. You put the detent screw in, and the reason why you put the detent screw in right now is because it's held down by the barrel bridge. You cannot put it in afterwards. And I noticed I left a fingerprint or two on the barrel inadvertently, so I'm going to take a little of this green putty-like substance watchmakers use called Rodico. It's excellent for many things, and especially for removing fingerprints. The barrel with the Rodico and removing my fingerprints. Fingerprints don't ever cause corrosion on the watch, nor will it ever cause any kind of staining in the future. So the next person that looks at the watch will say that this watch was handled by somebody who was a neat workman. Putting the Rodico aside, now we're going to pick up the barrel bridge and place that on the pillar plate, getting the center wheel through the jewel and the barrel arbor through the appropriate hole in the plate. Now I've got that on, and there's 3 more screws to go in. 1, 2, and 3. Using the appropriate screwdriver, tighten those screws. We've got the train and the watch. We're ready to put the setting parts back together. We've already got the detent screw in, and now it's time to put the detent in. And that goes right on the tip of the detent screw. And I'm going to take a little aid today with a piece of watchmaker's tissue because I have to put finger pressure on that detent. I'm holding it down with the watchmaker's tissue. That keeps my prints from going onto the watch. And I'm going to tighten that detent screw maybe a turn or 2. The detent is now on the detent screw, and it's ready to put the rest of the setting parts back in. The clutch should go in next, and it's very good procedure right now to lubricate the teeth of the clutch that mesh with the winding pinion. This gives the ratcheting effect so that when you're winding the watch and you turn the crown backwards, it allows the stem to ratchet without causing any damage to the watch. It belies the old tale that you should never turn the crown on a watch backwards from its winding position. This is just a regular ratchet like a ratchet wrench. Put the clutch back into the watch. Winding pinion goes in next. With the winding pinion teeth facing the clutch teeth. Now we'll put the stem in, and it's best to lubricate the stem also because the stem does all the turning when you wind the watch. The stem square section should have a very thin film of grease on it, as well as the tip, which we call the pilot, and also above the square part of the stem in the hub where it turns in the plate of the watch needs a little bit of grease. Now the stem goes into the watch, fit it through the winding pinion, the square meshes into the clutch. Don't force anything when you're fitting it, just make sure it goes in properly. Now we're ready to take the plate, loosen the detent screw slightly so that it'll pass, the stem will pass past the detent screw. And now snug the detent screw down. Again, not forcing it. And when it's working properly, you should be able to move the stem in and out, and you'll see the detent going up and down, so that will shift the setting points. Now we're ready to put in the clutch lever, which goes on its own post, and the clutch lever shifts the winding pinion from winding to setting position. Again, a little bit more grease right on the tip of the detent, where the tip of the detent mates with the clutch lever, and also a little bit of grease, just the tiniest bit, right on the post of the clutch lever. Now comes the hard part, the clutch lever spring. This is the one that's fairly strong because it puts pressure on the clutch lever so you get ratcheting action. Put it in position, and when you put it in position, I always like to hold it down with pegwood so that if I slip with the tweezer, the pegwood holds it down from flying. There it is, the clutch lever spring is in place. Now, a little bit more grease here, right on the clutch lever spring where it touches the clutch lever. Wherever two parts rub against each other, it's always best to lubricate them. We also need a little bit of KT22 grease right on each post for the setting wheels. There's 2 setting wheels in this watch. A little bit on the minute wheel post. You don't need much grease. And a little tiny bit on the pin of the detent where it rubs on the set bridge. A little upright pin on the detent so that when you pull the stem in and out, you have this action that holds the stem out, and that's caused by friction with the set bridge. Now we're ready to put in the setting wheels. Two setting wheels are in. We also have to do a little more lubricating on the center post. This is time to put the cannon pinion back on. And you must grease the center post where the cannon pinion goes on. Remember, the cannon pinion is the one that gives you the friction for the hand setting. I'm going to wipe off the oiler with some paper, and I'm also going to take some watch oil, heavy watch oil, using the same oiler which I have just wiped clean, and lubricating the lower pivot of the center wheel where it comes through the jewel. 1 or 2 small drops. Watch the oil flow off the oil tip, flow around the jewel so that the entire pivot is lubricated. Now the cannon pinion upright part is lubricated with grease. The pivot where it goes through the jewel is lubricated with oil. I have already taken the cannon pinion, put it back in the pin vise just the way we took it off, and I'm going to push it back onto the watch, twisting it slowly, ever so slowly until it goes down. And there it is. It's back down in place. Loosen the cannon pinion out of the pin vise, and the cannon pinion's on. The cannon pinion has to go on before the minute wheel. If you try to force it on after the minute wheel, you're liable to damage the minute wheel teeth. The minute wheel is on. Now the set bridge. And the set bridge is held on with 1 screw. Now this is the first screw we're using that's different than the other screws. This one has a chamfered underneath of the head to match the chamfered hole in the set bridge. Carefully screw it down. Push the arm of the set bridge so that it meshes properly with the detent. Make sure the screw is tight. If all goes well, we should be able to set the watch. There it goes. Pull it out and it sets, push it in, and it goes into winding position. I'm going to put in the crown wheel core. That's the small center, the steel center of the crown wheel. It's a steel center to take up all of the friction between the crown wheel and the plate. If you just let the crown wheel rub on the brass plate, you'd wear the plate right out because all of the force of winding goes through there. Of course, you're going to need a little grease on there. That KT22 stem and setting grease is appropriate for that. A little bit of grease on the crown wheel core. Put the crown wheel on and look for the crown wheel screw. Now, if you remember what we said earlier, the crown wheel screw is the only one with the left-handed threads. And you check the threads on it, and it's one that turns to the left. If you put the wrong screw in, it will not tighten down. Left hand. It's going to go counterclockwise when you screw it in. And there it is. It's down. I'm going to take the ratchet wheel. That's the large steel wheel. Mount that on the barrel bridge. Got a couple of things to consider. First of all, you have to make sure the click meshes with the wheel, and also the wheel meshes with the crown wheel, and the square in the opening of the center of the wheel meshes with the barrel arbor. So far, so good. It's all together. Now you take the ratchet wheel screw. Now that's a right-handed thread, and it looks a lot like the crown wheel screw, but the threads are right-handed. Tighten that screw down. I like to hold the ratchet wheel with pegwood while I tighten the screw, because if you just tighten the screw without holding it, it turns the barrel and the entire train. Now, it's a good time right now to check everything in the train before you go any further. You should have end shake in every wheel. You should be able to feel each wheel and make sure you have up and down shake. Not a lot, but a sufficient amount to give freedom to the train. Every wheel has shake. Now we're ready to oil the train. Wipe off the oiler again. I'm wiping it off with tissue. And remember the heavier oil, the 90-20 that I used on the lower center wheel pivot, I'm going to use a drop of that on the upper center wheel pivot. We use heavy oil on the large wheels because they have a lot of pressure on them from the mainspring. So we're putting just a drop or two of oil on the upper center wheel. Now also on the upper third wheel. I'm using the 90-20 lubricant on that. I'm going to turn the watch blade over and I'm going to lubricate the lower third wheel. Now we're going to get the 90-10, the very thin oil, and I'm going to lubricate the lower fourth wheel. That's the one with a long pivot. Drop of oil flowing around the jewel. Drop of oil on the escape wheel lower. Turn the watch over once more. Do the upper fourth wheel. And do the upper escape wheel. Now, if all goes well, give the winding stem a turn, and that train is moving freely. In fact, it's moving so freely it even recoils when it stops. It turns in one direction, stops momentarily, and then goes backwards. That's a sign the train is really free. Now we're coming to the part that requires probably the most care and most attention when you're replacing the parts back in the watch movement. I'm going to take the pallet fork and arbor. Remember we had said earlier that's a very delicate part of the watch. It's the escapement. This is the part that converts the rotary motion of the escape wheel into the oscillating motion of the balance wheel. The tips of the pallet stones, there are two of them in the pallet. The pallet stones look like rectangular blocks with angled faces. Each tip needs a lubricant. And in this case we're using a specialized lubricant called 9415 from Moebius in Switzerland. Just the tiniest drop on each pallet face. This lubricant is most important because it stays on the pallet stone, because the pallets are hit about 18,000 times an hour by the teeth of the escape wheel. And if you had a lubricant that flowed, it would go all over the pallet and all over the escape wheel and wouldn't stay where you wanted it. Now you put the pallet into the watch by putting it on its jewel in the plate, being very careful. Pallet arbors are very delicate. And you take the pallet cock, remember the one that's held with one screw, and put that on its steady pins. It has two steady pins and one screw hole. Very carefully line it up with the steady pins. Line up the arbor in the upper cock. There, so far so good. And it has its own screw, different than all the other screws in this watch. Tighten the screw down carefully. Make sure the pallet is in the hole, Jules. We do not want that pallet arbor broken. Screw is snug, and the pallet is free. It tips back and forth beautifully. I'm tipping the movement, and I'm watching the pallet fork go back and forth. Now we're going to take the balance cock with the balance wheel still in it. Mount it on the plate. Now here's a tricky part. You have to make sure that the roller jewel on the bottom of the balance wheel is in the pallet fork, in the opening of the pallet fork. And then you have to make sure the steady pins go in the appropriate hole. And I haven't even put the screw in. I'm moving the wheel back and forth just by moving the plate. And everything looks fine. The roller jewel is engaged in the pallet. I can now take the remaining bridge screw, which is the same as all the other bridge screws, put it in, and tighten it down. There are no jewels in the balance wheel yet. Those are going in next. Remember I said earlier that there were 4 jewels in the balance, 2 uppers, 2 lowers, and that consists of 2 hole jewels and 2 cap jewels. This is very delicate work. You have to be very careful because these cap jewels are only about 1/10 of a millimeter to 1/5 of a millimeter thick. And to make sure they're absolutely clean, it's best to take a piece of watchmaker's tissue and rub the jewel, the flat side over the tissue, and that makes sure that there's no oil residue on the jewel. The jewel will come out sparkling clean. It's almost like burnishing it clean. Now to put oil on the balance jewels, you can't just push oil through the hole in the jewel the way you did on the train jewels, because they're on the Inca block settings, there is metal around the hole, and there's no way you're going to be able to oil the jewel. So you oil the cap jewel. You turn the cap jewel over so the flat side is at you. You take your clean oiler and take some escapement oil, not escapement oil, but train oil, fine train oil, 90-10, and just put a drop in the center of the cap jewel. Right now I'm lubricating the thin cap jewel which goes in the plate. You want to make sure the drop of oil covers just about half the surface area of the cap jewel. And we have the hole jewel, that's H-O-L-E, and I'm going to pick it up and very carefully touch it to the oil cap jewel, and now they stick together using the oil as a capillary action. I'm going to repeat the same operation for the upper cap jewel using the 90-10, drop of oil on the cap jewel, notice I'm not talking while I do this because just the air from my breath is enough to lift the jewels off the tabletop and move them. So I'm going to be quiet and I'm going to stick them together again. Okay, they're both together, both held together with the oil. Now it's time to reinstall them. I'm going to open the Inca block spring, lift it at the hinged end very carefully using the tweezers. Remember, the thick jewel, the thick cap jewel goes in the cock. There aren't many places you'll find that written, but that's how it is. Turn the watch over, open up the lower Inca block setting. Again, being very careful, don't force anything, because if you break an Inca block spring, they are replaceable, but it's not fun. Close the spring. Turn the watch upside down, right side up once more. Check for end shake in the balance wheel, appropriate amount. Make sure the hairspring is flat as you look at it, and it's also centered, and it is. And finally, make sure the balance wheel is in beat. That means that the roller jewel, the pallet arbor, and the escape wheel centers all line up in a straight line, and if they don't, you can move the stud holder slightly, and that will put it in beat. You must have a straight line between the center of the balance wheel, the center of the escape wheel, and the center of the pallet. Once that's like that, the watch is considered in beat because the balance wheel will travel in equal amounts in each direction. Now comes the test. Let's find out. We take a piece of tissue paper, hold the watch by the edge. We want to keep our prints off of it. So we're going to give it a little wind, and there it goes. Wind it up, and it's running. Wind it fully. Put it back in the movement rest. Examine the balance wheel. The hairspring is breathing properly. The hairspring is centered between the two regulator pins. Everything looks fine. Balance wheel appears to have good motion. It should be traveling about 270 degrees in each direction in this position. And also, if you want to just do a quick double check, put it on edge. Watch it, make sure the motion of the balance wheel doesn't deteriorate very much. It should deteriorate about 20 to 30 degrees from the flat position. That's because when the balance wheel is on edge like this, the sides of the balance wheel pivots are rubbing in the jewels, creating more friction and taking away from its amplitude. That's the amount of motion it has. This looks fine. I think we're ready to put the dial and the hands back. Next, we need to put on the hour wheel, and don't forget the dial washer. Now, this dial washer is not 100% necessary. The watch will run without the dial washer, but it does provide a little friction to keep the hour hand from moving around when you're carrying the watch. Take the dial. Again, keep our fingers off of it. Remember the dial screws I had to tighten up a little while ago? Well, we're going to loosen those dial screws up a couple of turns. We're not going to take them out. We don't want to lose them. We just want to back them out about 2 turns. Now, lift up the dial, and this watch, you have to be very careful. This is one that winds at 3. Put the dial in position. Don't force it down yet. Make sure that the 4th wheel pivot is going to come through the hole for the second hands. We do not want to break that pivot. Carefully, it's lined up. Push it down with a piece of tissue paper. That keeps your fingers off of it. Now it's down. Now we're ready to snug the dial screws down. Tighten the 2 of them. And we're ready to put the hands back on the watch. I'm going to start with the second hand. And you notice that we did not wash the hands. It's good practice never to wash hands on a watch because you don't know how it's going to come out. The plating or the painting may come right off and you'll have hands that are no longer functional, and sometimes it's difficult to get new hands for a watch. So it's almost always better not to wash the hands. The second hand is on. I pushed it down snug but not too tight using the tweezer. I'm looking at it across the face of the dial to make sure it's parallel to the dial. Now we're going to take the hour hand. Same thing. Put the hour hand on. Line it up with the hour wheel. And we have a nylon tipped hand pusher. I'm going to put a little pressure on there. See if we can get it on. There it goes. It's going down. If you feel like you have to put too much pressure on that hand, it's best to stop and then support the back jewel. Because if you push down too hard to push your hand on, you could literally push the jewel onto the back of the watch. The experienced watchmaker knows how much he can push and how little he can push. And in this case, the hand is going on very nicely. It's down. And we're ready to put the minute hand on. I like to line up the hour hand with the 3 and then put the minute hand on so that the minute hand points right to the 12. And again, I'm putting it on using the nylon tipped pusher. Push it down. It looks good. We just turn the hands, make sure they don't interfere with each other. Fine. And they also, as I bring them around, do not interfere with the second hand. They line up properly. They look good. Okay, we are ready to recase the watch, and while we were cleaning the watch, what you didn't see was I actually took the case and washed it in a little soap and water. I used a dishwashing liquid. Washed it, rinsed it, dried it with a hairdryer. I don't want to use too aggressive a cleaner on the case because we don't know how the case is going to come out, but soap and water is usually pretty safe. Of course, the dial of the watch, never ever wash it unless you absolutely know that it's washable. If it's been painted, don't even think about washing it. If it's an enamel dial, you can wash it, but you're not going to find an enamel dial on a new watch. So the rule for a newer watch with a painted dial is either leave it alone or don't touch it. You might lightly brush it to get dust off, but you have to be very careful because that's what the customer sees. Almost anything you do to the hands and dial can be a disaster. I'm going to remove the stem now. I'm going to pull the stem into setting position. Loosen the detent. Don't loosen the detent too much. We don't want it to come off the end of the detent screw. Pull out the stem. Take the watch case and very carefully place the movement back into the case. I'm not touching the dial with my fingers. I am using that watch tissue, holding the watch movement in the case, and I'm going to take two casing screws, one, and start that in just to hold it in. Turn the movement around so I can reach the other one, put the other screw in the right place. Tighten it a couple of turns. Now with the movement still slightly loose in the case, I'm going to carefully refit the stem. Again, I don't want to force it in. Feel it in. There it is, it's in. Now we're going to tighten the detent screw completely. Remember, it was loose about 2 turns. Make sure it fits into the groove in the stem, then tighten it down. Pull the stem in and out, make sure it sets and winds. So far, so good. Go to the back of the case once more. Tighten up the casing screws now that the stem is in and the movement's properly centered in the case. Now we can put on the back dust cover. This just snaps on with finger pressure. Wouldn't hurt to take a little bit of tissue, wipe the fingerprints off, close the back of the case. One more thing to put on, the bezel and the crystal. Again, that just snaps on with finger pressure. Carefully line it up, snapping on beautifully. Make sure the hands don't touch the crystal. You can almost hear the hand scratching on the crystal if you do this, and you turn the hands. If they're touching the crystal, you can hear a scratching noise. That means the hands are a little too high. Hunting case watches are a little more tricky because there's less clearance under the crystal. But if you make sure the hands don't touch each other, they don't touch the dial, don't touch the crystal, you're in business. Finally, close the case, open smoothly, and then you can check it for timekeeping over a 24 or 48 hour period, and you are ready to use a watch.